And keeping up with an active war declared in West Asia, casualties are mounting in both Israel and Palestine. How will the ongoing conflict affect India-Israel trade ties? We are discussing that. Remember, as far as immediate impact is concerned, there is no immediate impact being seen on India's trade with Israel. However, it can create supply-side problems if the conflict escalates or continues beyond a usual expected timeline. India's export to Israel account for about 1.8% of India's total merchandise export, led by petroleum products. Israel buys around $5.5 to $6 billion of refined petroleum products. In financial year 23, India's total exports to Israel stood at $8.4 billion. And India, on the other hand, exported $2.3 billion worth from Israel. All of that, of course, going to play up. Kartik, Malhotra joining us here in the studio. Ajay Sahai is also with us. Let me firstly go to Ajay Sahai, who's the DG FIEO. Ajay, thank you so much for taking time out, sir. What sort of impact are we looking at as far as import-export between Israel and India is concerned in the short run as well as in the long run if the war continues? So you're on mute? Right, we can hear you, yes.
We are assuming that it will be just a kind of terrorist attack which will be dealt by Israel, and the neighboring countries or the global players they will not jump into at this point of time when we are still struggling with the war between Russia and Ukraine. The world can't afford a second war, which will definitely a death blow for not only the global trade but also the global economy. And I think you have rightly said that as of now we are not seeing much challenge. Of course, our concern will be definitely on the crude supply, which in any case is moving up and crude prices may go up. The other concern is with regard to the shipping cost, the freight cost, because I think the number of fleet may not be the same as they are prior to this crisis, and the insurance premium on the ship is likely to go up. There may be flight of capital also from various stock exchange to the US, which will appreciate the US dollar also, which is not so good sign for India's export. So far as specific to the trade with the Israel is concerned, I think we are little concerned with the supply of raw diamond, because Israel is one of the supplier of raw diamond, and the supply from Russia is already impacted. And if both Russia and Israel is out of the market, probably it may affect the supply of rough diamond, which in turn may affect the cut and polished diamond export. But we are hoping that the G7 proposal for lifting restriction on supply of Russian diamond may come into play very soon. And if that happens, we are not expecting much challenge.
Mr. Sahai, let's leave diamonds aside because that's an all-new discussion and we will, of course, address that as well. But I want to understand from you $10.7 billion, almost $11 billion, and India and Israel being one of the partners that India has, in fact, on which India accounts for a trade surplus rather than a trade deficit. So two questions to you. Number one, is $11 billion that big a trade volume that even if it were to get impacted, is there going to be a direct impact on the Indian economy? And number two, even if you look at the trade surplus at about $6 billion or so, as compared to the total trade deficit that India had last year of about $266 billion, is there going to be any dent at all when we talk about pure macroeconomics?
No, I don't think, because if you're looking into the oil trade, in fact, more than 50% of our trade with Israel is of the oil only, and we have wonderful opportunity on export of diesel and other products, because Russia has already decided they will not be supplying these products to European Union from October onwards. Moreover, we also feel that since Iran is also getting a participation in the war, probably there may be further sanctions coming on the Iran, which will create much more market for Indian oil sector. And that's why we are not worried. I'm pretty sure that we will be able to recover much more than that. I think for more important to us is the strategic partnership which we are having with the Israel, and Israel cooperation in many other areas also, that is much vital for us. And probably the Indian startups are also working very closely with Israel startups, and that's an area of concern. But since most of the transactions and interactions happen over the digital platform, we don't expect much disruption of that also.
Okay, and since you're talking about this whole trade that Indian startups are engaging with Israel, I think it's important to touch upon the I2U2 partnership as well, which is being referred to as the West Asia Quad. So this includes, of course, countries like India, Israel, along with UAE and US. And just about 2 weeks ago, we were talking about a space partnership also jointly being held. Do you see any roadblocks to that?
No, in fact, I think one of the reasons which people are citing is that Hamas may be upset with the way Middle East is approaching Israel, and probably the partnership of the Middle East with Israel is something which may not have been liked by the fundamentalists. That may be one of the reasons, but you have rightly put it that ITU2 is a very strategic partnership for India, and Israel is a very important partner for us, not only in space defense, even in renewable energy and technologies, particularly in the electronics sector. R&D is a forte of Israel, and many of the Indian companies are working with the Israel for R&D and technology transfer also. So from these perspective, of course, Israel is extremely important market. But so far as the trade is concerned, as of now, we are not expecting much change in the composition of the trade, and nor we will be impacted even if the trade is disrupted, because we will be able to recover in some other markets.
Okay, and talk to us specifically about the defense deals as well, sir, because India and Israel also go a long way when it comes to India procuring munitions from Israel, and even the drones that we are talking about and anti-tank missiles, etc. India has in fact done emergency procurement of even defense equipment from a country like Israel. So now, of course, as we understand, Israel is going to use all its military power against Hamas. And in the absence of manufacturing being done to cater to external markets like India, how do our defense deals really get impacted from here?
So in fact, I think that's why I'm saying it all depends what will be the intensity of the war and how much the war will prolong. Because if it prolongs for 2 months or so, these questions may come into play. But if that's why I'm much more concerned how the Middle East and some of the major in global player participate in this development. If they are not participating actively, I don't expect much challenge for that. It may be sorted out by Israel in a fortnight or so, but participation of the Middle Eastern countries on some of the global player will definitely escalate into a very major crisis for everyone, which may affect, of course, the defense supplies also temporarily.
Okay, and talk to us specifically about the oil and gas sector. Let's assume for now that Saudi Arabia is not going to be an active participant in the war because it doesn't have a military of its own, to a scale that it can participate in an active war. But Iran, of course, we have ties with Iran when it comes to gas, and in fact, that pipe dream of the gas pipeline, etc., coming through Pakistan, yet to see light of the day. So, on oil and gas specifically, our import bill, overall inflation in oil because of the Middle East region being in conflict, is that a cause of concern right now? We are also seeing crude, of course, on the back of the war, which had corrected to about $84, $85 per barrel, now inching up closer to 90 again. So specifically on oil and gas, are we seeing some some stress on numbers shoring up?
Yeah, definitely we are seeing some challenge on that because in any case the supply side has been impacted because Russia and Saudi Arabia has taken the voluntary cut other than the cut which OPEC has prescribed. So there is already a supply side challenges which we are facing, and probably this kind of crisis may impact the supply further. There may be little dampening in the demand also. If that happens, probably the oil prices may not zoom, but if the demand continues unabated, probably we will see oil maybe crossing $100 a barrel, and definitely that will push the inflation. That will also push the current account deficit, resulting in some problem for all the countries. The way the world is integrated today, this kind of development is bound to impact every country. Only the degree will vary.
All right, Mr. Sahai, stay with us. Colin Shah is the founder, MD of Karma Jewelry, also with us on the broadcast. Mr. Shah, thank you so much for taking time out. My first question to you perhaps is, given in light of an active war, what happens to supply of precious metals, diamonds in India? We're exporting majorly from Israel. Is that going to take a beating? Is our export of and demand for and therefore supply of precious metals going to take a beating in the short run?
No, not really. Though the war is unfortunate, our trade with Israel is not so large. Our exports are around $1.3 billion last year, and the imports are around 750, $800 million. So, they account for 1% of our imports and 3% of our overall exports. So I'm sure that the trade will be able to cover that up in some way or the other, because Israel as such was never a consuming center. It was more a transit like Antwerp or Dubai or Hong Kong or any of the other ports. So while it's unfortunate what has happened, we are very sure that it won't really impact our industry as such.
But Mr. Shah, your industry is already facing the heat, if I can use the word, given the fact that we have seen a slowdown in India's diamond exports. We've seen discretionary spending in US and China both taking a beating, and imports of rough stones from Russia coming into India for cutting and polishing also now under restriction. So overall, the outlook for the diamond industry has been a little tepid this entire last couple of months. And now add to this the woes coming from Israel. Is there really no reason to worry for the diamond industry right now?
No, you're absolutely. There's a lot of reason for worry, and like you correctly mentioned, the industry has been going through, I would say, a very tough time last 1 year. But that's more because of what we are seeing globally, and not necessarily, the Israel war as such. The slowdown in China has massively impacted us. The rough imports from Russia have impacted us. And more importantly, it's the slowdown that we are seeing in the American market. Though I must say, what's really happened is the retail, as we see it, and even the last 4 weeks, the heartening news are that retail is only 5 to 10% slow.
Okay.
But that 5-10%, I would say drop in demand on the consumer front has led to a 25-30% drop on the wholesale B2B front, which are our exports from India. So we are expecting the pipeline to get healthier in the next 3 to 6 months,
Okay.
and business come back to normal for next Christmas. Our business, like is seasonal, and we've coming out of the pandemic. 2 years were extremely strong, and I guess the entire pipeline, there was a little bit of overbuying, and now compounded with all the issues we're having globally, there is just too much inventory with retailers globally. And as this one season, I think, even if it's 5-10% down, we see consumption happening, weddings happening. We do firmly believe that next year we'll be back on track.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead, Kartik.
Mr. Shah, I want to come to you. Now, we've seen, of course, war after war in the region. First, we saw 2021, US pulling out of Afghanistan. 2022, we saw Russia and Ukraine going into conflict. Now, we are looking at Israel versus Hamas. Overall, inflationary pressure likely to get further added. And if that happens, discretionary spending in the US likely to go down further. If that goes down further, any impact on India's exports that you're seeing? And I'm talking both manufacturing and services this time.
See, if you look at our industry, and I won't take, I won't be able to give a view on the other industries, but
Okay, let's take it
our
to Mr.
industry
Sahai then. Mr.
traditionally
Sahai,
has.
do you have a view on that, sir?
So definitely, if you look into the trend of the global trade, the World WTO has come with the revised forecast where they have reduced the volume-wise growth from 1.7% to 0.8%, and even in services front, we are seeing little moderation. So this will definitely a challenging year so far trade is concerned, both of the goods and services. If you look into the goods imports by the major countries, except for some extent in the automobile sector, where we are seeing little growth, and in the agriculture sector, whether you are talking about petroleum crude or chemicals or iron steel, we are seeing sharp decline in volume terms as well. So definitely it's going to be a very challenging year for what exports are concerned, more so on the goods front, but in the services front also the kind of growth which we have witnessed in the past may not be able to be sustained in this current year.
Okay, but talk to us specifically about inflation, sir. Is inflation going to become a more pronounced challenge than it already is globally?
No, in fact, if you look into inflation, the August number is at 6.83, which is much above the 4% plus
I'm talking
minus
global
2%
inflation, so not
mandate given to
specifically India. I'm
RBI.
talking global inflation and
The
inflation in
global
the US,
inflation,
which
of
is
course,
then going to
because
continue the rate hike cycle and therefore sort of cascading effect on India and rest of the world.
absolutely. In fact, this is the factor which may not have been taken by any of the central bank, even without the factor the US Fed was talking about an increase in the interest rates. Now, with this kind of challenge happening, many of these central banks may increase the rate. So inflation is definitely going to be a major challenge, particularly if the energy and crude prices moves northward.
Mr. Sahai, before we move back to the topic in hand, I also want to quickly begin and perhaps understand from you. We keep talking about exports picking up, and in light of wars, as my colleague Kartik pointed out, and now with Israel-Palestine conflict again shooting up, do you see exports picking up in emerging market economies as well as developed economies? Do you see demand coming back, sir? Because that's what we've heard Commerce Ministers say again and again. Are there any green shoots?
No, in fact, that's why I said that in some of the technology-driven sector and the food sectors, we are seeing increasing demand, but global demand, because of the high inventory, is still very low, and with the interest rates moving up, companies are managing with the lean inventory also. So that has affected the trade, global trade. It's India is not an exception. Look into the export number of any country. Every country is facing a decline in their exports.
Okay. Let's also talk about supply chain disruption. There are news, of course, that ports are closing down or likely to be closed down, including the Haifa port where Adani has made a major investment. Freight prices are going to go up. What is another bummer would be an IMEEC project, which was announced on the sidelines of the G20, the India-Middle East Economic Corridor. What is the possibility of that corridor, Mr. Sahai, going on as planned, or perhaps even starting operations? Yes.
No, that's true. I think IMECC project is still at a conceptual state. We have not worked out how much is the total cost of the project. We are talking about the route, which is a very linear route, which may not be working there. As of now, if that's why I think the conflict is confined to the Gaza Strip, there's not much problem. The IMEC will be on track, but if some of the Middle East countries join it, or Israel is actively involved, probably the focus may be shifted. And that's why in such situation, there may be a question mark in timely completion of the IMECC also.
Okay, so that's the map of the IMEEC, and just for the sake of our viewers, this is the India Middle East Europe Economic Corridor, IMEEC as it is referred to, going all the way from Mumbai, the first port being Dubai, and from Dubai by road and by train, the cargo moving all the way up to Israel. And Israel-Haifa port, which Adani Group bought for $1.2 billion earlier this year, is going to be the point of transit to the northern corridor, and that northern corridor goes all the way from Israel and enters Greece, and thereby further by road and by rail networks into rest of Europe. And if you look at it in the context of the I2U2 from Europe, then the shipping lines to US become a direct sort of entry, and therefore trade between India with Europe, not just the Middle East, and therefore with US and reverse trade as well, becomes that much more barrier free. Now, as you see, Shweta, this port is this route is largely running through Saudi Arabia and thereby going into Israel. You really don't have much of a concern, if you ask me specifically right now, because it's unlikely that Saudi Arabia is going to get into this conflict at all. In fact, if anything, it will look at it from the sidelines, but militarily, economically, it's unlikely that Saudi Arabia at this stage at least is going to enter the war. If you were to look at the ports, let's move to the next map and look at the Haifa port. And after that, we could get into the statements which are coming from the Adani Group also. But if you just stay here for a moment, Haifa port is up on the north. Now, if you look at the map right now, you will see that the battle is actually being fought in the Gaza Strip, and that Gaza Strip is in fact south of Ashdod port.
So, in fact, Ashdod port has been bombed just about a couple of minutes ago. There are news items coming in that
I haven't seen that, but
bombing in the Ashdod.
Haifa is up in the northern side of Israel, and right now it seems that the port is unaffected. A couple of hours ago, the Adani Group had come out with a statement. Let's pull up that statement also. The Adani Group saying that it is looking at this situation closely, and it is really monitoring the welfare of its employees there. And right now, so the statement up there, we are closely monitoring the action on ground, which is concentrated in South Israel, whereas Haifa is up in the north part of Israel. Another statement also coming in from Adani Group. This one is saying that for the current financial year, which is up until April last year to March this year, April this year to March next year, FY24, Adani Port is saying that we've guided for Haifa cargo volumes to range between 10 to 12 million metric tons. And the APSEZ, which is the Adani Ports and SEZ's total cargo volume guidance is about 370 to 390 million metric tons. So a small size of the business, about 3% or so. But remember, if you go back to the map, this Haifa port is pretty much the port which is going to, be the sort of, making or unmaking of the
bridge,
India economic,
Indian.
India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. So Haifa port definitely important. But right now, statement coming about 2 hours ago from Adani Group saying that they are watching the situation closely, but no disruption in port operations yet, because Haifa is up in the northern side of Israel and the action is happening in the southern side.
Right, and there is no news report of Haifa port being impacted, but Ashdod, we are given to understand there's been bombing there. We'll try and get you more details, but I want to get Mr. Sahani back before we also go to Mr. Shah. Mr. Sahani, from what appears that
Mr. Sahai.
what appears that a dream for an India-Middle East economic corridors for the moment are going to be put a break on or break to with the latest situation as it is as escalating as we speak. My understanding, and perhaps you could elaborate on it, for the near at least 1 or 2 years, an IMEEC project is not likely to come into fruition.
I think it's too early to predict the same. That's why I'm saying all depends how much is the duration of the war, how intense is the war. If it is not a war where number of countries join it, I don't think there is any impact on the IMEC corridor. If it escalates into war and it prolonged for many months, probably the project may be delayed, but it's a long-term project in any case. The huge investment has to take place. As of now, I won't say there is any challenge to IMECC, but of course they are concerned with regard to that.
All right. Also, Mr. Shah, before we let you go, you said that it appears that the ongoing escalation of conflict in Israel and Palestine will not have any likely impact on precious metals and diamonds, but it is going to further deepen the crisis that Indian precious metal industry is facing at the moment. Would you agree with that analysis?
Yeah, I agree with that analysis. And, like Mr. Sahai said, we are going through a tough time, and there's no doubt about that. We're just hoping that this tough time ends as we see some, I guess, closure to especially the Russia crisis. I guess that has a larger impact on our exports and the industry out of India than what's happening in the Middle East right now.
All right, Mr. Ajay Sahai, Colin Shah, thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for taking time out and for joining us this afternoon. But as the ongoing conflict, Kartik, continues, we continue to bring more stories. But what seemed to be an immediate impact is that trade will remain robust, perhaps, if the war does not escalate any further from here. There are, of course, calls to bring peace into the region. We don't know whether that's going to happen or not. But the immediate impact could be on crude prices, could be on freight prices, is what we are going to see in days and weeks to come.
It looks like, Shweta, honestly difficult to put a finger on any side of the story right now. I think it's a function of the war is just 2 days old technically. So, I think whatever trading we are seeing even on crude right now is more on speculation, more on sentiment, rather than any fundamental disruption of any kind anywhere. So I think we'll have to wait and watch and see how this war unfolds and how it escalates or de-escalates, and basis that perhaps, all agencies, all countries worldwide are going to recalibrate their numbers, their figures, both on inflation, on oil, on trade, and everything else and supply chains and everything that goes into making of economic policies going forward.
All right, and we'll keep bringing you those details here on News 9. Thank you for watching.